Chapter 14. The journey back to Airlee lasted almost 3 days, partly because Alvin, for his own reasons, was in no hurry to return. The physical exploration of Lys had now taken second place to a more important and exciting project. He was slowly making contact with the strange, obsessed intelligence which had now become his companion. He suspected that the robot was trying to use him for its own purposes, which would be no more than poetic justice. What its motives were, he could never be quite certain, since it still stubbornly refused to speak to him. For some reason of his own, perhaps fear that it might reveal too many of his secrets, the Master must have placed very efficient blocks upon its speech circuits, and Alvin's attempts to clear them were completely unsuccessful. Even indirect questioning of the "if you say something, I shall assume you mean yes" type failed. The robot was much too intelligent to be taken in by such simple tricks. In other respects, however, it was more cooperative. It would obey any orders that did not require it to speak or reveal information. After a while, Alvin found that he could control it, as he could direct the robots in Diaspar by thought alone. This was a great step forward, and a little later, the creature, it was hard to think of it as a mere machine, relaxed its guard still further and allowed him to see through its eyes. It did not object, it seemed, to such passive forms of communication, but it blocked all attempts at closer intimacy. Hilvar's existence it ignored completely. It would obey none of his commands, and its mind was closed to all his probing. At first, this was something of a disappointment to Alvin, who had hoped that Hilvar's greater mental powers would enable him to force open this treasure chest of hidden memories. It was not until later that he realized the advantage of possessing a servant who would obey no one else in all the world. The member of the expedition who strongly objected to the robot was Kreef. Perhaps he imagined that he now had a rival, or perhaps he disapproved, on general principles, of anything that flew without wings. When no one was looking, he had made several direct assaults on the robot, which had infuriated him still further by taking not the slightest notice of his attacks. Eventually, Hilvar had been able to calm him down, and on the homeward journey in the ground car, he seemed to have resigned himself to the situation. Robot and insect escorted the vehicle as it glided silently through forest and field, each keeping to the side of its respective master and pretending that its rival was not there. Serranus was already waiting for them as the car floated into Airlee. It was impossible, Alvin thought, to surprise these people. Their interlinked minds kept them in touch with everything that was happening in their land. He wondered how they had reacted to his adventures in Chalmoraine, which presumably everyone in Lys now knew about. Serranus seemed to be worried and more uncertain than he had ever seen her before, and Alvin remembered the choice that now lay before him. In the excitement of the last few days, he had almost forgotten it. He did not like to spend energy worrying about problems that still lay in the future. But the future was now upon him. He must decide in which of these two worlds he wished to live. The voice of Serranus was troubled when she began to speak, and Alvin had the sudden impression that something had gone awry with the plans that Lys had been making for him. What had been happening during his absence? Had emissaries gone into Diaspar to tamper with Kedron's mind? And had they failed in their duty? "Alvin," began Serranus, "there are many things I did not tell you before, but which you must now learn if you are to understand our actions. You know one of the reasons for the isolation of our two races, the fear of the invaders, that dark shadow in the depths of every human mind, turned your people against the world and made them lose themselves in their own dreams. Here in Lys, that fear has never been so great, though we bore the burden of the final attack. We had a better reason for our actions, and what we did with open eyes. Long ago, Alvin, men sought immortality, and at last achieved it. They forgot that a world which had banished death must also banish life. The power to extend his life indefinitely might bring contentment to the individual, but brought stagnation to the race. Ages ago, we sacrificed our immortality, but Diaspora still follows the false dream. That is why our ways parted, and why they must never meet again. Although the words had been more than half expected, the blow seemed nonetheless for its anticipation. Yet Alvin refused to admit the failure of all his plans, half-formed though they were, and only part of his brain was listening to Serranus now. He understood and noted all her words, but the conscious portion of his mind was retracing the road to Diaspar, trying to imagine every obstacle that could be placed in his way. Serranus was clearly unhappy. Her voice was almost pleading as it spoke, and Alvin knew that she was talking not only to him, but to her son. She must be aware of the understanding and affection that had grown up between them during the days they had spent together. Hilvar was watching his mother intently as she spoke, and it seemed to Alvin that his gaze had not merely concern, but also more than a trace of censure. "We do not wish to make you do anything against your will, but you must surely realize what it would mean if our people met again. Between our culture and yours is a gulf as great as any that ever separated Earth from its ancient colonies. Think of this one fact, Alvin. You and Hilvar are now nearly of the same age, but both he and I will have been dead for centuries, while you are still a youth. And this is only your first in an infinite series of lives." The room was very quiet. So quiet that Alvin could hear the strange plaintive cries of unknown beasts in the fields beyond the village. Presently, he said almost in a whisper, "What do you want me to do?" "We hoped that we could give you the choice of staying here or returning to Diaspar, but now that is impossible. Too much has happened for us to leave the decision in your hands. Even in the short time you've been here, your influence has been highly disturbing. No, I am not reproving you. I am sure you intended no harm, but it would have been best to leave the creatures you met in Shalmoraine to their own destiny. And as for Diaspar..." Serranus gave a gesture of annoyance. "Too many people know where you have gone. We did not act in time. What is most serious, the man who helped you discover Lys has vanished. Neither your council nor our agents can discover him, so he remains a potential danger to our security. Perhaps you are surprised that I am telling you all this, but it is quite safe for me to do so. I am afraid we have only one choice before us. We must send you back to Diaspar with a false set of memories. Those memories have been constructed with great care, and when you return home, you will know nothing of us. You will believe that you have had rather dull and dangerous adventures in gloomy underground caverns, where the roofs continually collapsed behind you, and you kept alive only through eating unappetizing weeds and drinking from occasional springs. For the rest of your life, you will believe this to be the truth, and everyone in Diaspora will accept your story. There will be no mystery, then, to lure any future explorers. They will think they know all there is to be known about Lys." Serranus paused and looked at Alvin with anxious eyes. "We are very sorry that this is necessary, and ask your forgiveness while you still remember us. You may not accept our verdict, but we know many facts that are hidden from you. At least you will have no regrets, for you will believe that you have discovered all there is to be found." Alvin wondered if that was true. He was not sure that he would ever settle down to the routine of life in Diaspora, even when he had convinced himself that nothing worthwhile had existed beyond its walls. What was more, he had no intention of putting the matter to the test. "When do you wish me to undergo this treatment?" Alvin asked. "Immediately. We are ready now. Open your mind to me, as you did before, and you will know nothing until you find yourself back in Diaspora." Alvin was silent for a while. Then he said quietly, "I would like to say goodbye to Hilvar." Seranus nodded. "I understand. I will leave you here for a while and return when you are ready." She walked over to the stairs that led down to the interior of the house and left them alone on the roof. It was some time before Alvin spoke to his friend. He felt a great sadness, yet also an unbroken determination not to permit the wreck of all his hopes. He looked once more down upon the village where he had found a measure of happiness, and which he might never see again, if those who were ranged behind Seranus had their way. The ground car was still standing beneath one of the wide branching trees, with the patient robot in the air above it. A few children had gathered around to examine this strange newcomer, but none of the adults seemed in the least interested. "Hilvar," said Alvin abruptly, "I'm very sorry about this." "So am I," Hilvar answered, his voice unstable with emotion. "I had hoped that you could have remained. Do you think that what Seranus wants to do is right?" "Do not blame my mother. She's only doing as she is asked," replied Hilvar. Though he had not answered his question, Alvin had not the heart to ask it again. It was unfair to put such a strain on his friend's loyalty. "Then tell me this," asked Alvin. "How could your people stop me if I tried to leave with my memories untouched?" "It would be very easy. If you tried to escape, we would take control of your mind and force you to come back." Alvin had expected as much, and was not discouraged. He wished that he could confide in Hilvar, who was obviously upset by their impending separation. But he dared not risk the failure of his plans. Very carefully, checking every detail, he traced out the only road that could lead him back to Diaspar on the terms he wished. There was one risk which he had to face, and against which he could do nothing to protect himself. If Seranus broke her promise and dipped into his mind, all his careful preparations might be in vain. He held out his hand to Hilvar, who grasped it firmly, but seemed unable to speak. "Let's go downstairs to meet Seranus," said Alvin. "I'd like to see some of the people in the village before I go." Hilvar followed him silently into the peaceful coolness of the house, and then out through the hallway and onto the ring of colored glass that surrounded the building. Seranus was waiting for them there, looking calm and resolute. She knew that Alvin was trying to hide something from her, and thought again of the precautions she had taken. As a man may flex his muscles before some great effort, she ran through the compulsion patterns she might have to use. "Are you ready, Alvin?" she asked. "Quite ready," replied Alvin, and there was a tone in his voice that made her look at him sharply. "Then it will be best if you make your mind as blank as you did before. You will feel and know nothing after that, until you find yourself back in Diaspar." Alvin turned to Hilvar and said in a quick whisper that Seranus could not hear, "Goodbye, Hilvar. Don't worry. I'll be back." Then he faced Seranus again. "I don't resent what you are trying to do," he said. "No doubt you believe it is for the best, but I think you are wrong. Diaspar and Lys should not remain apart forever. One day they may need each other desperately. So I'm going home with all that I have learned, and I do not think that you can stop me." He waited no longer, and it was just as well. Seranus never moved, but instantly he felt his body slipping from his control. The power that had brushed aside his own will was even greater than he had expected, and he realized that many hidden minds must be aiding Seranus. Helplessly, he began to walk back into the house, and for an awful moment, he thought his plan had failed. Then there came a flash of steel and crystal, and metal arms closed swiftly around him. His body fought against them, as he had known that it must do, but the struggles were useless. The ground fell away beneath him, and he caught a glimpse of Hilvar, frozen by surprise, with a foolish smile upon his face. The robot was carrying him a dozen feet above the ground, much faster than a man could run. It took Soranis only a moment to understand his ruse, and his struggles died away as she relaxed her control. But she was not defeated yet, and presently there happened that which Alvin had feared and done his best to counteract. There were now two separate entities fighting inside his mind, and one of them was pleading with the robot, begging it to set him down. The real Alvin waited, breathlessly, resisting only a little against forces he knew he could not hope to fight. He had gambled. There was no way of telling beforehand if his uncertain ally would obey orders as complex as those that he had given it. Under no circumstances, he had told the robot, must it obey any further commands of his until he was safely inside Diaspar. Those were the orders. If they were obeyed, Alvin had placed his fate beyond the reach of human interference. Never hesitating, the machine raced along the path he had so carefully mapped out for. A part of him was still pleading angrily to be released, but he knew now that he was safe. And presently, Soranis understood that too, for the forces inside his brain ceased to war with one another. Once more, he was at peace. As ages go, an earlier wanderer had been when, lashed to the mast of his ship, he had heard the song of the sirens die away across the wine-dark sea.